friends, I'm Lauren Bernick, and I'm flipping the script about growing older. My guests have been influencers since before that was even a thing. Welcome to the Anti-Aging Podcast. Welcome to Age Like a Badass Mother. What if I told you that you could think yourself younger and healthier? Would you believe me? That's just what our guest today has proven with her scientific research. Ellen J. Langer is the author of 11 books, including the international bestseller Mindfulness, which has been translated into 15 languages, and Counterclockwise, Mindful Health and the Power of Possibility. Most recently, she is the author of The Mindful Body, Thinking Our Way to Chronic Health. Langer is the recipient of, among other numerous awards and honors, a Guggenheim Fellowship, the Award for Distinguished Contributions to Psychology in the Public Interest from the American Psychological Association, the Award for Distinguished Contributions of Basic Science to the Application of Psychology from the American Association of Applied and Preventative Psychology, and the Adult Development and Aging Distinguished Research Achievement Award from the American Psychological Association. She is the author of more than 200 research articles, and her trailblazing experiments in social psychology have earned her inclusion in the New York Times Magazine's Year in Ideas issue. A member of the psychology department at Harvard University and a painter, she lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Please help me welcome our guest, Dr. Ellen Langer.
Hi, thank you, Lauren.
Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning.
So, Dr. Langer, you've conducted over 200 studies. When did you first realize that people were being mindless?
Oh, gosh. I think what happened was I walked into Bloomingdale's or someplace, bumped into a mannequin and said, "Excuse me." And then I started to pay attention to this. When I moved from New York to Cambridge, it was very interesting to me because I had the stereotype of Cambridge as being very, very Harvard, high IQ, everybody smart. And at this time, and it's changed since then, at 3:00, the bank would be closed and there was nobody using the parking spaces. That would never happen in New York. I mean, people would immediately rush there because you're not going to get a ticket. And so I started noticing all of these sorts of things. You'd go into a bank in Cambridge and you'd have 10 people on one line for the teller. That was before we had ATMs, and 2 people on another, rather than the people at the back of the 10-person line quickly going over. So it was a difference between New York street smarts and IQ. I had misjudged a lot of it, but I saw it as people just not being there. And they might have just not been in a hurry the way people in New York were. But nevertheless, and my father, when I was growing up, would constantly go out in the evening, when he went out in the evening, and come back because he had forgotten his keys. And so things started to add up. And I must say, Lauren, I've been studying this for over 45 years, and the resounding finding is that virtually all of us, almost all the time, are mindless. Now, the thing is that when you're not there to know you're not there. But let me tell you, we're not making the best use of our minds, our lives, and what have you.
Yeah, when I was reading your book, I was just thinking about all the times I'm mindless and just
but the thing, is
bumbling
remember,
through
you
life.
you can think about that, but you're not aware of all the times you're not aware. Right?
That's exactly.
So you have
yes.
to, multiply it, or it's exponentially more often that you're mindless.
Right, but once you try to start paying attention, you realize that you are.
Well, when you notice things that you didn't notice, things right in front of you that have always been there, that's probably the best signal. If everybody just walked out of their house and noticed 3 new things, all of a sudden they'd see the street is very different from the way it was the day before. And if we keep doing that, what happens when you're actively noticing, which is the essence of being mindful, the neurons are firing, and all of that research that you mentioned makes clear that that's literally and figuratively enlivening. So when you're there, the neurons are firing. You look alert. People respond to you in a whole different way. You're taking advantage of things to which you'd otherwise be blind, avoiding dangers that you otherwise would have missed. Life just becomes a very different set of circumstances simply by active noticing. Let
So
me tell you.
that's
So
really just the
that's the
key to
essence
just
of being mindful. But let me make clear. When people hear the word mindfulness, they often think of meditation, and meditation is something that's just different. Meditation is a practice you engage in to result in post meditative mindfulness. Mindfulness, as I study it, is immediate, and it results in from an awareness of the implicit or the inherent uncertainty in everything. So you can become mindful in one of two ways. Bottom up, which is active noticing things that you think you know, then you see you didn't know them as well as you thought you did, your attention naturally goes to them. Or top down, which is realizing none of us know anything for sure. And that's very hard for people to accept. But everything is always changing. Everything looks different from different perspectives. So uncertainty is the rule, not the exception. Now, especially women, when we don't know in the society we've all been brought up in, we take a back seat. We think that we're supposed to know. He typically is acting as if he does know. Well, he doesn't know. We don't know. We can't know. And so if we change our perception of this from a personal attribution of not know, I don't know, but I should know. So then pretend, don't engage, to a universal attribute. I don't know, you don't know, nobody knows. Now, everybody thinks they know. So when I say this, I say, what is she talking about? So then I start typically with these conversations with the thing everybody thinks they know. So Lauren, how much is 1 + 1? I've scared you already, right?
well, I know what you're going to say.
Okay, but you'll play along because your audience doesn't know.
Yes, 2.
Okay,
It's 2.
right. But no, 1 and 1 isn't always 2. First, I'll give you the complicated one. If you're using a base 10 number system, 1 + 1 is 2. If you're using a base 2 number system, 1 + 1 is written as 10, but who cares about number systems? If you add one pile of laundry to one pile of laundry, 1 + 1 is 1. You add 1 wad of chewing gum to 1 wad of chewing gum, 1 + 1. Somebody sent me something the other day that I loved. If you take one pizza and you put it on top of one pizza, 1 + 1 is 2. However, if you take one lasagna and you add to it one lasagna, 1 + 1 is 1. It's just a bigger lasagna. So in the real world, 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2 as or more often as it does. Now, think about this. This is the important part of this. If someone comes up to you now and asks you how much is 1 + 1, all of a sudden you have choices. Rather than mindlessly saying 2, you say, oh, I could say 1, I could say 2, I could say 10, possibly even other answers. All right. And you're present while you're doing this. You're noticing the context as you're making this decision. And all of that is gone when we're acting on the world like robots. How much is 1 and 1 is 2? Now, let me tell you something, and which will be relevant to the other questions you're going to ask me. So I was a straight A student, right? The one people dislike because I always knew the answer. I'm at this horse event, and this man asked me, can I watch his horse for him because he wants to get his horse a hot dog? Well, yeah, horses don't eat meat, right? So I have to keep myself from laughing at him. I said, sure, I'll watch your horse. He comes back with the hot dog, and the horse ate it. And that's when I realized everything I thought I knew could be wrong. Now, if I were normal, that would probably scare me. I don't know anything, but not me. What it did was excite me because that meant everything was possible. All those things I thought couldn't be possible, like horses couldn't eat meat and so on, now needed to be questioned. And lots of my work goes in places where most people would have thought, no, it can't be. Horses can't eat meat. We can't improve our vision. We can't live longer by changing our minds, so on and so forth. And we can.
Yeah, let's start digging into some of those studies. Like, I feel like I'm pulling you out like a old rock star and making you play all the hits. I hope you're not sick of
No,
talking
no,
about
no.
these things.
It's
But
interesting because I've been doing so many podcasts, and many of them I say the same thing. I try to say them a little differently, and that because I'm able to say them in a different way. So on the top, layer, it looks like it's the same old, but my experience of it is not. So I love talking about this stuff because my
good,
goal in
good.
it is to get people to wake up. Essentially, go on, ask me the question.
Yeah, and I think that I thought I hadn't heard of you. My friend said, "Oh, you have to have Dr. Langer on." She told me about the counterclockwise study, which we'll talk about as it relates to age like a badass mother. But then I was like, "Oh, I've never heard of her." But as I was researching you, I was like, "Oh, this does sound familiar." So, it
It
probably
takes
is
a
new
while to get
information to a
out
lot
there.
of people.
Yeah.
Yeah, or they've
Well,
forgotten that they knew.
but
So maybe,
the new studies will be brand new for people. But yes, let's
yeah,
start at the beginning. All right.
start. What do you like to start with, like the house
Well,
plant study,
no,
or
we don't have
so
enough
you
time
tell
to go
me
that far back. Let's just start with the
with
counterclockwise study.
counterclockwise?
All right.
This is
So let me tell you
phenomenal.
what motivated this. I started to think people talk about mind and body, and that's nice, but they're just words. And you always have the problem, how do you get from one to the other? How do you get from a thought to something material? Now we all know that the mind and the body are at least related. I'm going to go beyond that though. That you're walking down the street and a leaf blows in your face and you get startled until you realize it was just a leaf. Or you see somebody vomiting and you yourself, feel like you're going to regurgitate. So, and also I think our strongest medicine is a placebo. You take this thing that's nothing, you think it's something, and you get better. Okay, so I say, wait a second, mind body dualism, there's just something wrong with that. Let's put them back together as one thing. And if the mind and the body are one thing, then wherever you're putting one, you're necessarily putting the body. Now, you had said you heard about some of my work. It takes such a long time for this to get into the general public. And the first influence of a lot of my work is people start talking about mind body connection. It's not connected because if it's connected, you still have to, how is it connected? Let's just put them, it's one unit. And
It's
then
one
the
thing.
amount of control we have over our health and well being is enormous. So, the first test of this is what I'm going to call the famous counterclockwise study. Sounds obnoxious. How can she call her own study famous? Because anybody who's
It is.
misunderstanding anything I'm saying now can tune in to The Simpsons Go to Havana. And they talk about the study. Okay, the study was conducted a long time ago. Very simply, we took a retreat, retrofitted it to 20 years earlier, and we were going to have elderly men live there as if they were their younger selves. So it wasn't quite a Hollywood set. I didn't have the funds for that, but it took you back in time. You were going to be discussing things from the past, watching television shows from the past, and all the while discussing these as if it was just unfolding. In less than a week, we found people's vision improved, their hearing improved, their memory, their strength, and they looked noticeably younger just by
Yeah,
changing their
and so
minds.
this was 1979. You set the clock back to 1959.
Right,
So all the magazines were from
right.
1959. The
Castro
shows,
and Gorbachev. Yeah,
they had pictures of each other from that. They were
yeah,
told to talk in present as if it was
yeah.
1959.
But let me,
And
we can spend the whole time talking about just that study, but there are so many new ones that people haven't heard of. So let me just say that when the changes were occurring, it was palpable. When I first wrote about this, I was a little, skittish. Here I was this young woman and I was going to be turning everything upside down. So I didn't state it as dramatically as it actually unfolded. There were several of the men who had canes, that at the end they weren't using the canes. At the end of this, I was playing football with touch football. I didn't want to be tackled anymore than they wanted to tackle me. But yes, and so it was very, very exciting. And the next study, several years later, was very interesting. I think will be interesting to your audience if they don't know it. So we took chambermaids, and the first thing we asked them was, "How much exercise do you get?" Well, these are women who are exercising all day long, right? They said they weren't getting any exercise because they thought exercise is what you do after work. And after work, they were just too tired. Okay, now, first thing, if exercise is good for you, then they should be, whether they know they're exercising or not, they are exercising. They should be healthier than similar others. And they're not. Okay, so we divide them into two groups. Very simple study. And one group, we teach them their work is exercise. We say making a bed is like working at this machine at the gym, dusting the windows like this other machine, and so on. So now we have two groups. One group is oblivious to the fact that their work is exercise. The other group believes their work is exercise. We take many, many measures. They don't differ on any of them. They're not. One group isn't working any harder than the other. They're not eating any differently. Nevertheless, the group that changed their mind and now sees their work as exercise lost weight. There was a change in waist to hip ratio, body mass index, and their blood pressure came down. Something very interesting about this that I've only recently started to talk about is that, because the results themselves are so, unusual, is that this was the study of the nocebo effect. And okay, so everybody has a placebo. You take a nothing, you think it's something, and it acts like the something. The nocebo is the inside out of that. You do something, here, exercise, that's something, but you don't think it is, and that undercuts its effectiveness. So, let's say you're going to a doctor and you're given medication and the medication isn't effective. What the doctor is likely to do is increase the dosage. But if you're not partnering in your own health care, that's not going to be effective. We have so much control that we're exercising, and the absence of that exercise is hurting us. Anyway, so that's the next study. We have so many of these studies. Let me just tell you one or two others. We have people in a sleep lab. They wake up and they see the clock, because we fudged the clock, that they think they got 2 hours more sleep than they got, or 2 hours fewer, or the amount of sleep they got. What happened is biological and cognitive function follow perceived amount of sleep. If that clock tells you you've slept well, you've slept well. Let me tell you just the last one in the series, although we have so many in between. So we inflict a wound. It's a minor wound because nobody's going to let me hurt them, and I don't want to hurt anybody, but it's a wound. And again, I'm using a clock. So individually, you're in front of a clock. You've been wounded, you're in front of a clock. For a third of the people, the clock is going twice as fast as real time. For a third of the people, it's going half as fast as real time. And for a third of the people, it's real time. Now, most people would assume that wound is going to heal when that wound heals. What's the difference what the clock says? But in fact, our perceived passage of time is what determines healing time. And the importance of this, and another piece that I should have said earlier, I don't know what order to tell you, I'm so excited about sharing this information, is that, where was I going with all of it? That when doctors tell you that whatever condition you have is going to take X amount of months, whatever, to heal, they can't know this. But it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay, so the piece that go back to the horses. And when I saw that horse eat the meat, I asked, what does it mean horses don't eat meat? Then I realized that science doesn't give us the answers that everybody thinks it does. Science only gives us probabilities. So if we take these kinds of horses and we feed them these kinds of hot dogs, mixed with however amount of grain to meat and what have you, most of them won't eat meat. The most is translated as horses don't eat meat. It's very different. If you're told it takes 3 months to heal from whatever, your broken arm or what have you, what does that mean? Everybody doesn't heal in 3 months, right? Some people take longer. Some people take, that means we have a lot of room to manipulate our own behavior, our own healing time. And so all research is probabilistic. And if we accept that, then we don't disengage and just sort of blindly follow medical advice, right? So one of my favorite things to share with people is that if you have a chronic illness, most people think that means you have no control over it. All chronic means is that the medical world doesn't have any answer for us. There are many things we can do. So in the study you wanted me to begin with that, I didn't. We take old people, we make them more mindful, and it's going to be actively noticing new things. They live longer. Okay, so you've got a chronic illness. When you're told you have a chronic, what happens? You become depressed, you retreat from the world, essentially increasing your mindlessness. If we turn that around and we become more mindful, the neurons are firing, we're going to be helping ourselves. Second, and this is wild, doesn't come from our lab. So you're in bed with whatever the chronic illness is, so you can't be outside exercising. Turns out, imagined exercise is as effective as actual exercise. This is several labs, not mine. Wild, right? So, you can imagine yourself exercising, and if you're doing new exercises, then you're being mindful while you're doing that, and good things are happening. The next thing is we developed a treatment, which I call attention to symptom variability. That's just a fancy way of saying being mindful. Being mindful is noticing change. That means noticing variability, right? So we call people periodically in the course of a day, and we say, how is your symptom? Whichever symptom we're talking about. Is it better or worse than the last time we spoke? And why? Now, several things happen with this. First, when you have a chronic illness, you feel helpless. Now, all of a sudden, you're doing something for yourself. That feels good. Second, once you see that, geez, sometimes it's a little better. Nothing stays exactly the same. When we say the stock market's going up, it doesn't go up in a straight line. It goes up and then down a little, and it just means it goes up more than it goes down. Everything is always changing, no matter if you think you're depressed all the time, stressed all the time, and pain, you're not. You can't be. Moment to moment, there are always changes. Okay, so then when we ask you, how is it different? And you say, gee, today it's a little better. Well, that feels good. And all of a sudden, you realize that it's not quite as bad as you had thought. The next is the most important. When we say why, then you do a mindful search, and that mindfulness is good for your health. Finally, I believe if you're looking for a solution, you're more likely to find one than if you're not. And what you tend to believe with the chronic illness is that that's it. There's nothing I can do. So anyway, so we do this, calling people periodically throughout the day, throughout the week, over time. And we get improvements, significant improvements with Parkinson's, stroke, arthritis, multiple sclerosis, chronic pain, a host of big disorders. The beauty, Lauren, is that you can do this for yourself. You have a smartphone. If you don't, get it from your kids. And you set it to ring in 2 hours. And it rings. Say, how is a symptom now? Is it better or worse than before? And why? Then set it to ring in an hour and 33 minutes. Just pick different times. And you just keep repeating this. And the good thing is that there's no negative side effects. You're engaged, so it's going to be good for you, even if you don't get a solution. But so let's say you're somebody who thinks that you're always stressed. So I call you periodically, or now you're going to do it yourself. How are you now? Is it better or worse than before, and why? And you do this over time. You say, Lauren says to herself, I'm maximally stressed when I'm talking to Ellen Langer. Okay, well, if that were the case, the solution is easy, right? Don't talk to me. So you're going to improve even if you don't find a solution. And we find across a host of disorders that people do find solutions. And this is very exciting. And it differs. And you can then share, this doesn't have to be in place of medical treatment. You can share the information with your physician. And the hardest part with lots of disorders is the waiting time in between and finding out, if you've improved or what have you. And this will keep us busy, if nothing else. But I shouldn't say if nothing else, because the effects have been dramatic and exciting.
Yeah, that is dramatic. Just the noticing. I have a question going back to like the chambermaid study.
Yeah.
So if you can notice yourself into losing weight, can you do other things like notice? How would you maybe do that for crepey skin or wrinkles? Does that even happen?
We haven't tested it. Conceptually, there's no reason why not. The problem with a lot of it is that if you deeply believe you can't, then it's very hard to persuade yourself that you can. It's sort of, for the same reason you can't give yourself a placebo. So you're going to give yourself a nothing, tell yourself it's something, and then heal. But conceptually, I don't know why not. And it's also the case that many of those wrinkles are, when you talk about mind-body unity, everything is connected to everything else. And when you're at peace, every freckle on your face, every organ in your body is going to also be responding. But, I think that the world has, maybe it's Medicine Avenue, has given us too much worry about these wrinkles. If we change the name of them to marks of distinction, and then we welcome
Love
them.
it.
And it's interesting because in welcoming them, we'd probably be reducing, some of them. I think that we're taught so many negative things about aging when we're younger that it's too easy for it just to take on a life of its own as we get older. I had this experience, which I was about 30 years old, and I was at this very, very conference where everybody there was in their late 50s. It was an invited small group of big shots. And they wanted to address the problem in 2024. No, it was actually 2020. Whatever it was, because this was many years earlier, there's going to be a lot of old people. So they wanted to address the problems of aging. So there I was with all these older people, and they just kept talking about all the problems, and I didn't, I didn't accept those problems. And then I thought, well, wait, where do I come from? I mean, they're living it. What makes me so sure? And then I thought about it and thought, well, where do we get our ideas about aging in the first place? And it tends to be from your grandmother. Now, so if you have a grandmother who's young and vital, and grandmother, the word means old, then your notion of old is young. And that was the case for me. And we actually studied this, and it seems to be true. So
Yeah.
much of what we experience is a function of the mindsets the stereotypes we accepted when we were younger. If you just think about it, if you believe that as you get older, you're going to fall apart. Many people believe this. When you're first given this information, you're very young and vital, so who cares, right? So you lock yourself into it. So if you're 20 years old and you hurt your wrist, you're going to take care of it, right? But let's say you're 75 years old and your wrist hurts. too often people will say, what do you expect? I'm 75. You start to fall apart. So then you have the young person taking care of the wrist, the older person not. Clearly, the young person's wrist is going to get better, and the older person's wrist not so much. And then we have this thing about forgetting. You'll love this. So I teach Harvard students, right? And before I give them a lecture on aging, this is in a health psychology course. First thing I say to them is, okay, this is on a Thursday, right? We meet Tuesday and Thursday. I said, what was the last thing I said on Tuesday? These are Harvard students, young, vital, smart. Nobody knows. The point
Right.
being, young people are not infrequently forgetful. And the problem for most of us as we're older is that we oftentimes mistake a circumstance for forgetfulness when it wasn't. So let's say you introduced me to four of your friends, and big shots, right? And I'm 30 years old and I'm an up and coming, and I know I need to learn their names. Good. So I learn them. Now I'm 77, which I am. You introduced me to four of your friends. Frankly, Lauren, I don't care. Why should I learn their names? If I'm going to have a relationship with them, there's going to be plenty of time. Okay, so now
Sure.
the next day in both instances, you asked me about one of the friends, and I don't know to whom, of whom you're speaking. It's not that I forgot. I didn't learn it in the first place. And if you don't learn it in the first place, when you don't know it in the second place, it has nothing to do with memory. So our values change, the way we organize our lives, the things that we care about. If you don't care about the same things, you're not going to have that information handy. You're watching television, you're 80 years old, and you're watching television with your daughter, maybe your granddaughter, and then afterwards, you start discussing what you just saw. Well, and you don't know what they're talking about. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not interested in the same things they were interested in. And so, if you don't, again, see the same thing, you're not going to have the information available to you. You see what I'm saying? That.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. So you just need to expect
Right.
that you're going to age well.
Yeah, and
Is
that,
that
there may be some
basically?
memory loss, but, there is some memory loss, but I think it's been grossly exaggerated. And we get so afraid
Yeah.
that when you're in a set of circumstances where you think you should remember and you're talking to yourself and you're afraid you're not going to remember, you're making it harder for yourself to remember. And when I'm lecturing, I'm talking to hundreds of kids, and it wouldn't matter if it were, I do this sometimes when I'm giving a talk before many, many people. And I have so many ideas, and I'll forget where I am, and I'll say, what was I just saying? But who cares?
So you said you're 77. Has mindful aging changed for you now that it's in practice and not in theory? And what are you doing to stay so engaged and youthful?
Nothing has changed for me. I tend not to pay any attention to age. Not that long ago, I was helping this woman who I thought was an old woman. And my partner said to me, honey, she's probably younger than you are. So I have no sense of how old I am. I'm just the same person I always was. I was very fortunate, Lauren. I was brought up by parents who were fabulously supportive. And so, having grown up just being positive and feeling good about things, I think one of the major things that ages people is stress. And what people need to realize is that events don't cause stress. What causes stress are the views we take of events. And the more mindful you are, the more options you have as to how to understand an event. So if a simple thing happens, for example, let's say the internet goes out. Now, oh my God, some people, to me, it would just mean, that I'd go have breakfast. you know, and when you live your life long enough in this way, where you realize that events are neither positive nor negative, that events are events, and it's our understanding of them that leads us to feel however we're going to feel, you come to see how much control you have. And it's very important because stress ages people. But not only that, I think that stress is the major killer. If you took people who had any disease, let's give them cancer, and no one, when they first find out they have cancer, is going to be unstressed, but let's give people a few weeks to live with it. If then we measured their level of stress every few weeks, I think what we would find, I don't have data for this, but nevertheless, I believe that we would find that the degree of stress determines the course of the disease over and above genetics, nutrition, even treatment.
Mm.
And I think the world is coming closer and closer to this view. But everybody knows stress isn't good for you. And realizing that, I wrote a paper, a blog a long time ago about aging. Remember you were 2 years old and you scraped your knee and you scream bloody murder. And then you're 6 years old and Johnny or Janie doesn't send you a Valentine and you're crushed. And then you're 13 years old and you get some pimples. At some point, you realize that this is all nonsense. And that the same way, if you scraped your knee now, you would realize it's going to heal, that most things take care of themselves. And I think that if people even just realize that almost always the things we're worried about never happen. And if they happen, since you're able to think about them now, somehow you're able to deal with them. I think that people should start controlling their stress. I think, that something that I say to people that seems to work for them is next time you're stressed, just ask yourself, is it a tragedy or an inconvenience? It's almost never a tragedy. And the older we get, the more experience we have with things that we worried about and thought were tragic. I missed the bus. I banged the car. I forgot to buy whatever I was supposed to buy at the supermarket. So what? And and by doing this, we don't waste so much time. Right now, people keep worrying about events that are probably not going to even happen.
Yeah. My friend and I have a saying.
Remember, no worry before it's time.
Yes. My friend and I always say, may that be the worst thing that happened to me today. Like, I
Yeah,
don't
that's good.
stress very much about anything. It has to be pretty good for me to
Exactly.
stress out
Yeah.
about it. And
Yeah, I have a friend who calls most stresses champagne problems.
champagne will fix it.
They're,
No, or
they're not. They're not. No, no, no. Well, champagne might fix it, but I think he was saying that these are
a
a
luxury
luxury
problem. Yes.
problems. They're not life and death the way
Yeah.
we tend to often think about them.
So
But as one of the good things about getting older is that as you age, you tend to learn. I'm trying to hasten the learning. In fact, I teach my students that, the wisdom that often comes with age, you don't have to wait until you're older to have it. All you need to recognize is that events don't cause our emotions. Our emotions are caused by our views of events. The more mindful we are, the more possible ways of understanding things. The more experienced we are, the more we can look back and say, oh yeah, I thought that was awful, but look at how it turned out actually to be an advantage. I have this little semi-treatment, we'll call it. I don't know what semi-treatment means, but that when people are stressed, if you think about stress, and to be stressed means you believe something's going to happen, and when it happens, it's going to be awful. So take both of those. So you believe something is going to happen, just ask yourself for 3-4 reasons why it might not happen, and you're immediately less stressed. But then the fun part is the second part there. Let's imagine that this thing you're worried about does happen, and ask yourself, how is it actually an advantage? And you do these things often enough, so for me, life is just fine. Whatever happens is good. That if the internet goes out, as I said before, I'll have lunch. If the car doesn't work, that's good. I'll spend the day catching up on things in the house, so on.
Yeah.
That these are really not worth the time that we give them. And the time would be better spent just mindfully engaged in uh, whatever we feel like doing in the course of the day.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. And it brings me to g- I was reading about language in your book. I think the language matters too. It's not just your perception of what
Mm.
happens, but like you were talking about chronic disease versus chronic
Um,
health. You said
definitely.
who decided the disease was
Right.
chronic, or a cancer versus a cold. When you go in remission, you're expecting the cancer to come back versus a
Yeah,
cold.
let me tell the
Can you
remission.
talk about that?
Yeah, let me tell the remission story because that's fun. So I was visiting my friend Eva, who had this very bad case of cancer, an unusual cancer. And I said, "How are you?" And she said, "Well, she's good because she just got back from Mass General and they told her cancer was in remission." And then something went off. I thought, wait a second. If I went for the very same test, they would tell me, presumably, I don't have cancer. Why is it I don't have it, but she has it in remission? Now, remission is better than an active case, but it's not nearly as good as being cured. And so we looked at women on a breast cancer awareness walk to find out, did they see that cancer is in remission or cured? And we went back 6 months later, and those who saw their cancer is cured were better psychologically and physically. That I think the world that we most of us have grown up in knows how to go. They can't always do it, but they know how to go to bad to improved. And I spend a lot of time in the mindful body discussing there's a better than better way. The one that was most fun for me was I was asked to give a sermon at one of the Harvard churches. I'm Jewish and I'm not religious, but I say yes to everything. So I say yes, and now what am I going to talk about? I know nothing about religion. So then I said, well, forgiveness. I could think about forgiveness. It's not religion, but it sounds religion-y, and I could get away with it. And then I do a deep dive in my head, thinking about forgiveness, and I come up with something that was virtually sacrilegious. So, for example, if you ask 10 people, is forgiveness good or bad? They're going to tell you it's good. If you ask 10 people, is blame good or bad? They're going to tell you it's bad. But wait a second. The only way you can forgive is if you blame. Our forgivers are our blamers. Now, do you blame people for good things or bad things? You blame people for bad things. But things in and of themselves are neither good nor bad. So what do we have here? We have people who see the world negatively, who blame, and then forgive. Didn't seem to me divine. There's a much better way. Certainly, if you blame, you're best off forgiving. However, you shouldn't be blaming in the first place. When you recognize this very simple thing, and this is important in our understanding ourselves, not just other people, is that behavior makes sense when we do it, or else we wouldn't do it. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, today I'm going to be obnoxious, clumsy, irritable. Okay, so when people are behaving that way, what's really going on? So it turns out that every single negative description of behavior in general, has an equally strong but oppositely valenced alternative, a positive for every negative. So let's say, Lauren, and this is true, I am so gullible, it defies belief that somebody of my stature is just so gullible. I've been taken by two psychopaths, not just one. Okay, so I mark the edge of the gullible continuum. So help me not be gullible. So you're going to help me. I'm going to try, but I'm always going to fail. Why? Because from my perspective going forward, I'm being trusting. And as long as I value being trusting, I'm always going to be gullible. Okay. You, on the other hand, are inconsistent, and that drives you crazy. So you come to me, Professor Dr. Langer, cosmic leader, can you help me not be so inconsistent? And I'll show you. We'll look at your past behavior and all the mistakes you made. So you're going to try not to be inconsistent. But going forward, nobody intends to be inconsistent. You're intending to be flexible. And as long as you're flexible, you're going to appear at times inconsistent. So we gave people a list of behaviors and we said, circle those things that you keep trying to change about yourself and you keep failing. So for me, I'd circle gullible. I would circle impulsive, and we don't care about the rest. Then you turn the page over, and in a mixed up order are the positive versions of these. Now the task is circle those things you really value about yourself. And to me, it's my being trusting and spontaneous. So if I'm trusting and spontaneous, I'm going to appear gullible and impulsive. And so what
Your
that means
perception.
now is that whenever you look back and say, oh God, how could I have done this or that? There's always a good reason for it. And then we like ourselves more. And now you're living with somebody, and even though you've been living with them for 25 years, they're still getting on your nerves, and they promise they won't do it anymore. You say to yourself, you're going to let them do whatever this thing is. That's excusing their behavior is better than punishing them for their behavior. But the better than better way is for you to understand it from their perspective going forward. So this very simple thing, mindfully recognizing behavior makes sense or the person wouldn't have done it, leads to better feelings about ourselves, improved relationships. And then again, you're just living in a world that's nicer, which makes it easier, less stress
Yes, you're
free.
just giving them the benefit of the doubt, but more or less, right? You're
Well,
Oh,
it's
is it
not, no,
different?
no. I think Well, yeah, it is different from the benefit of the doubt is that better than not giving them the benefit. But I'm saying there's a better than better way. It's not the benefit of the doubt. It's not that, well,
Mm,
maybe they did this bad thing, but you're going to
right.
assume they didn't mean it. I'm saying that very thing they did
They did,
was
yes,
sensible
from their
from their
perspective. So you have
perspective.
to put yourself in their
So if I
shoes,
do something for
basically,
you,
from their point of view, understand they were
yeah,
doing it.
or just say, you don't even have to do that. You just say to yourself, what is a positive version of this very thing I'm accusing them of? So I'm driving you crazy because I'm gullible. I don't want you to give me the benefit of the doubt and saying maybe I wasn't gullible. I want you to say, what is a positive version of gullible? And it's
Mm,
trusting. Do you want me to be less trusting? Probably
yes.
not. But if we ever want to change anyone's behavior, our own or anybody else's, we need to address it from the perspective of the person going forward. If you want me to stop being gullible, you have to get me to stop valuing being trusting. If I want to get you to stop being so inconsistent, I have to get you to stop valuing being flexible. And my guess is most of the time we won't want ourselves or
Got it.
anybody else
That
to
makes perfect
change.
sense. Let me just ask you a couple quick questions. I know we have to wrap it up here. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received? It doesn't even have to be age related.
Oh gosh, I have no idea.
Well, do you have a best piece of it?
It's interesting that
That's funny.
I have advice for other people for sure, but the reason that I don't know the best piece of advice is because it's just like with my writing, that I'll submit a book or an article, and an editor will make some changes, and I like being edited, so that when somebody tells me something, I immediately incorporate it if it's sensible to me. So it's not there's one piece of advice. There may be, advice coming every day or, every week and so on. After 77 years of it, it's hard to pick a single thing out. But one thing I will say, advice to people as they're aging, because right now the world seems obsessed with finding ways to live longer. And I think that that's a mistake. I think that rather than worrying about adding more years to your life, what you want to do is add more life to your years. And that should also work to make you live longer. We if people know, well, there are lots of times people get a diagnosis with some, you have a heart attack or, something of this sort, and you live through it. And for those people, all of a sudden they come alive, because they recognize that all we have is right now. And why waste the time when we don't know how much time we have? And it's so easy, in all the ways that I've told you already today, for life to unfold very differently. If we stop blaming ourselves and blaming other people, if we recognize that we have control over our emotions are choices. They derive from our understanding of events. The more mindful, the more potential understandings we have. And that when it comes to our health, there are enormous things we can do to keep ourselves healthy and active.
I think I
So there.
think you summed it up. You did good. Um, I can't thank you enough.
Okay.
You embody everything you say. You are a delight, and you have this beautiful lightness about you, and whatever, we've had a lot of technical difficulties today, and you're like whatever, and I'm kind of the same way. I'm like whatever, it'll all work out, and so I
Yeah.
love that quality in you, and I appreciate you
Thank
helping
you.
us understand how to age better and really just live better. I shouldn't even say age, just live better. So thank
Exactly.
you. Thank you,
Right.
Dr. Langer.
Thank you.
Take care.
This was
Thank
fun.
you.
Nice to see you. All right. Bye now.
Bye. Thanks for listening, friend. From my heart to yours, be well until we meet again.